Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the debut film from Dario Argento, his first of many gialli. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, released in 1970. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview, which will be spoiler-free. Here is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage Overview. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is an Italian and West German co-production, also called The Gallery Murders and The Phantom of Terror. The film is, of course, directed by Dario Argento, produced by his father, Salvatore Argento. The screenplay for the film was written by Dario Argento, likewise, and was based on the Frederick Brown story, The Screaming Mimi. Music is composed by Ennio Morricone. The cast of players are Tony Musante as Sam Dalmas, Susie Kendall as Julia, Enrico Maria Salerno as Inspector Morosini, Eva Renzi as Monica Ranieri, Umberto Rajo as Alberto Ranieri, Mario Adorf as Berto Consalvi, Renato Romano as Carlo, Werner Peters as Antique Dealer, and Reggie Nalder as Assassin in Yellow. The plot follows Sam Dalmas, an American writer abroad in Rome on sabbatical, who, on the final night of his stay, while on a walk, witnesses an attempted murder through the glass windows of an art gallery. Believing that Sam may be the key to the mystery, the inspector on the case, Morosini, holds onto Sam's passport, forcing him to stay in Rome against his will. What unfolds is Sam being compelled to conduct his own amateurish investigation so he can get answers and ultimately return home to America. I believe The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is the first true giallo, and while some may disagree with me, it's not as if I'm pulling this out of thin air. If you've watched my videos before this, I have covered practically every giallo before this, the proto-gialli, in either an overview format in the Forgotten Giallo film series, or as a deep dive with a full movie breakdown review and gialli tally. And after covering over 50 plus movies from 1963 to 1969, I will stand by my assertion that this is the first true giallo. Again, this film does not exist in a vacuum. It is not as if this film came along out of nowhere and changed the game. The proto-giallo films which did come before this were playing within the format before it was established. Much in the same way that Halloween, 1978, was the first slasher, but that is not to say that there was no movie before it which played with the idea of a killer going about slaying young people. Black Christmas was 4 years before Halloween, in fact. But in order for a genre to truly establish itself, a few things have to happen in tandem. There is the form and the tropes which must be set up, as well as success with both critical and box office, prompting copycats to, well, copy it. Slasher-type films did exist, but they weren't called slashers. Once Halloween came about and other directors wanted to cash in on the film's success, namely Sean Cunningham with Friday the 13th, the genre was established. The same is true for giallo films. Giallo-type films did exist, and if you've seen my video about the history of giallo cinema in context, you can see the evolution of how these types of films began to form out of other type films and became their own subgenre. They owe their origin to Edgar Allan Poe, to Alfred Hitchcock, to Edgar Wallace and Agatha Christie, to H.G. Clouseau, to the narrative boom of giallo paperbacks in Italy, and to new cinematic trends of the past decade or two. Many early giallo films may have drawn inspiration from the giallo novels in which the name giallo comes from, but these were arguably homages, and none had proved to be a success to the point of them creating a new cinematic subgenre until The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Blood and Black Lace, 1964, must be given some due credit. The film certainly is a precursor to giallo films of the 1970s. It is a giallo, let's get that understood, but again, it was made at a time when giallo was not a true subgenre of film, and quite honestly, the film behaves much like a German Krimi film, which did exist at the time and which it was marketed as during its release. The main difference between Blood and Black Lace and the debut film from Dario Argento is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage was a major success in both Italy and abroad. The film spawned a run of copycats all doing their best to bank off the success of the new hit film. Argento draws upon Bava's proto-gialli in more ways in fact. Similarly to the first of the proto-giallo films, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, the main character is a young, naive American abroad in Rome. Both also become entangled in a web of legal red tape while also trying to unveil the crucial clue to solving the central mystery of the film. What makes this film and its director so incredible is the fact that Argento clearly knew the films which came before his and was able to craft a new story which drew upon them as influences without delving into mere imitation territory. What he created brought its own template, which borrowed from many of the films we covered on this channel, which did come before it, but set itself apart from them at the same time. For the next decade, most Italian directors would try to replicate the formula set up here, and few would be able to hold a candle to this film. Chiefly of them all would be the director himself, Dario Argento, who for the rest of his career would seemingly try to recreate the magic of his own film, while only a few times truly usurping the success of it. The film is filled with numerous scenes and moments which showcase what a tour de force Argento was behind the camera, which is even more impressive considering this was his film debut. From the stylistic usage of POVs in the stalking scenes, to the visceral and savage yet graphically subdued murder scenes which linger long in the viewer's mind far after the movie has ended, to the wonderfully symbolic visuals of the gallery scene, which show our characters trapped in more ways than one. Many of the elements set up by Argento here are arguably stronger in this first film than in his later attempts to recreate them in his subsequent giallo films. His characters are also best represented here, as is the script's adherence to logic, which, as his filmography goes on, will begin to be thrown out entirely. Lastly, Argento's early films have a good amount of humor tossed in at just the right spots, but later ones he would do away with this, only to realize that maybe he should reintroduce it into his much later films, but by then it would seem that he sort of lost his touch. Ennio Morricone brings all of these perfect elements together with an amazingly haunting score. As the genre would boom over the next several years, Morricone would become as associated with the giallo genre's music as he was with the spaghetti western genre and its music. He was born in 1928 and began working in films in the late 1950s. He would find his calling when composing the score for Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars, 1964. The success of the music shined as brightly as the success of the film itself, and amazingly enough, many Americans and people abroad who may not be cinephiles or big movie buffs will all know Ennio Morricone's music, whether they know that they know it or not. You play a few seconds from any of his iconic scores from the Leone films, and I guarantee everyone will know it from its heavy usage in later films and even commercials. Keeping with Leone, Morricone would compose the scores for his other films, notably For a Few Dollars More, 1965, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, and Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Over the decades, Morricone would compose music for over 500 films. Some other noteworthy music credits of his include Frantic, 1988 by Roman Polanski, 1900, 1976 by Bernardo Bertolucci, Burn, 1969 by Gillo Pontecorvo, The Key, 1983 by Tinto Brass, White Dog, 1982 by Samuel Fuller, The Thing, 1982 by John Carpenter, The Sicilian Clan, 1969 by Henri Verneuil, Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, 1970 by Elio Petri, The Untouchables, 1987 by Brian De Palma, Days of Heaven, 1978 by Terrence Malick, U-Turn, 1997 by Oliver Stone, Hawks and Sparrows, 1966 by Pier Paolo Pasolini, and Danger Diabolique, 1968 by Mario Bava. There are truly too many to list, and I guarantee there's a film you've seen that he's done the music for, and if not, his music in the Leone films ought to sound familiar to you. The other Argento films he scored include The Cat o' Nine Tails, 1971, and Four Flies on Grey Velvet, 1972, as well as The Stendhal Syndrome, 1996, and The Phantom of the Opera, 1998. Other giallo film soundtracks he did include Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 1970, The Fifth Chord and A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, both 1971, and one of my favorite giallo soundtracks ever, Who Saw Her Die, 1972. But again, the list even for just giallo film scores goes on. He unfortunately passed away in 2020 at the age of 91. Dario Argento, the writer-director, was born in 1940 in Rome. Dario was the son of both a film producer and a fashion photographer, and was raised in a rather affluent setting, and from an early age had become a film buff. He got his start as a film critic, writing for Paese Sera, a newspaper, then made the switch in the late 1960s to screenwriter. With Sergio Leone and Bernardo Bertolucci, young Argento helped create the story outline for Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Now, Argento would go on to stretch the truth as to how much involvement he had in the writing process for this film, but regardless, he was present and was good company for Leone and Bertolucci. The writing credit alone was a big deal and allowed young Dario to write the script for the drama The Love Circle, 1969 by Patroni Griffi. After, he wrote the script for The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and after asking his father if he could direct, who reluctantly agreed, Argento was booked to direct his first feature film, the success of which allowed him to direct his next two gialli, The Cat o' Nine Tails and Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Argento remained in the limelight with him hosting the TV series Door into Darkness, 1973. With the later release of the giallo masterpiece Deep Red, 1975, and Suspiria, 1977, considered by many to be one of, if not the greatest Italian horror film ever made, Argento was able to forge for himself the title of being the king of Italian horror and a master of horror. He would ride the wave of his success through the next decade. However, an aging Argento would attempt to break through into American cinemas with two ultimate failed attempts, being Two Evil Eyes, 1990, and Trauma, 1993, starring his daughter, Asia Argento. These endeavors would leave a stain on his career, and when he would attempt to return to Italian productions, the box office reception of his most recent films had forced him to work with significantly smaller budgets and tighter schedules. Despite turning out questionable films in the past 3 or so decades, the early accomplishments of Argento already cemented his place in the canon of Italian films, Italian horror, horror films in general, and giallo cinema. American actor Tony Mussanti leads the film, and his performance is generally seen as benefiting the film with his nuances of charm, warmth, and humor. British actor Susie Kendall would go on to appear in another giallo classic, Torso, 1973 by Sergio Martino. She does her job by bringing some humanity and believability to the role of Sam's girlfriend. Enrico Maria Salerno brings a performance that leaves us with one of the greatest police detective characters in an Argento giallo, who in retrospect accomplishes the feat of being both likable and competent. Salerno would go on to be a major actor in the Italian polizieschi genre. In closing, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is a seminal giallo in the formation of this genre. The script is based upon a novel by Frederick Brown, The Screaming Mimi, which was itself adapted into film in 1958 by Gerd Oswald. The main plot of Sam witnessing a murderer but actually misunderstanding the true circumstances of the situation is taken from The Girl Who Knew Too Much, and the appearance of the killer themselves is taken from Blood and Blacklace. Argento also did not set out to direct the film initially, but after it was turned down by Duccio Tassari and Terrence Young, director of numerous James Bond films as well as one of my favorite thrillers, Wait Until Dark, 1967, Argento agreed to direct. Together with his assistant, Aldo Lotto, director of two great gialli, The Short Night of Glass Dolls, 1971, and Who Saw Her Die, 1972, the two endeavored to rewrite the script several times, as so eventually it would not feel as a direct remake of the original source material. Argento brought on Mussanti after working with him previously, despite the two having a tense work relationship due to Mussanti's method acting clashing with Argento's approach to directing. Because of a co-production contract with West German CCC Film, most of the casting was sought out from West Germany. Actor Reggie Nalder was picked up by Argento after the latter saw him acting in an American TV production filming in Rome, and the man known as the face that launched 1,000 trips was brought on to play the assassin in yellow, coincidentally having already played the hitman in The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1956 by Alfred Hitchcock. Thanks to a strong contract, Argento was spared from being replaced halfway through the production, prompted by his inexperience. The film was done in English for the favor of the cast and for the hopes of international distribution, so I will be covering the film in English versus in Italian. I did ponder this for a while. The film was released in Italy on February 27, 1970, later in Germany on June 24, 1970, where it was advertised as a Brian E. Wallace adaptation, aka a Crimmy. The film ranks 272 on Empire's list of 500 greatest movies of all time, and the film is the first film in Argento's thematic Animal Trilogy. This movie can easily be seen, and numerous DVDs and Blu-rays exist. I own the film on DVD from Blue Underground and on Blu-ray from Arrow Video. Some IMDb fun fact trivia for the film. It has been alleged that Tony Musante, known for his intensity and preparedness as an actor, would frequently show up at Dario Argento's apartment at 3 a.m. to discuss characterization, much to Argento's annoyance. The Hornidus nivalis bird species doesn't actually exist. The one seen in the film is played by a gray-crowned crane of Africa. The painting the killer buys from the antique store heavily resembles Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Hunters in the Snow. This film played in a Milan cinema for 3.5 years, such was the film's popularity in its native Italy. At one point, an executive producer wanted Dario Argento removed from the production when he was disappointed by a screening of some dailies. When Argento's father, Salvatore Argento, went to the exec's office to talk to him, he found the exec's secretary visibly shaken. When he asked the secretary what was troubling her, she said she saw the screening and the footage terrified her. Salvatore Argento then asked her to go tell her boss about her reaction to the screening. She convinced the executive to keep Dario Argento on as director. The script to The Bird with the Crystal Plumage was written in 5 days. Eva Renzi considered the participation in this movie as career suicide. She was not a fan of the film nor her role in it. In an interview, she stated that was beneath her talent as an actress. The film was shot in just 6 weeks. This POV shot was achieved by actually dropping a camera 6 stories onto a concrete sidewalk. The camera did indeed break, but the footage was saved. Dario Argento body doubled as the killer. Every shot of the black leather gloves was in fact him, for he knew exactly how to handle the hand movements. The rare Siberian bird from which the title of the film comes from is actually a crowned crane native to Africa. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the review and gialli tally for The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Thank you all very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Hello?
Where are you going?
You said so long.
I always say that.